Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, and don't forget to subscribe and activate notifications. On a peaceful evening, Mark returns home after a long workday and finds his wife, Sarah, preparing dinner. For a moment, he feels thankful for the stable life they have built together. They've been married for 7 years without children, but they share a dependable routine and mutual respect that has always kept them close. Mark feels that they work well together. He's a committed lawyer, always thorough and precise, while she's a dedicated doctor who spends most of her time caring for patients and dealing with the challenges of life and death. However, something feels different that night. Sarah appears preoccupied, her focus distant as she stirs the pot. Mark, accustomed to reading people, notices her absent expression and senses an unease, an emotion he can't fully explain. He watches her in silence, hoping she'll meet his gaze, but she seems reluctant. Then, without much introduction, she breaks the silence with a statement that completely surprises him. "Mark, James is in town. Do you mind if I meet him for coffee?" The question hangs in the air, and its impact is immediate. Mark's heart skips a beat, and his mind sharpens with alertness. He knows that name, James, Sarah's ex-boyfriend. He was aware that James had been significant in her life before they met, but he never pressed for details. All he knew was that their breakup had been messy, filled with intense arguments and unresolved emotions. Nevertheless, it was in the past, and Mark had always trusted that the shadows of that relationship wouldn't resurface to trouble them now. Mark takes a deep breath, trying to grasp the reason behind the request. He's usually a rational and level-headed person, so his initial instinct is to find a positive explanation. Perhaps it's just a casual meeting. Maybe she just wants to close an old chapter. But at the same time, a growing discomfort begins to settle in. He knows James's reputation. He's a charming man, someone who, despite being married, had a history of infidelities and secret affairs. Mark can't help but worry about the risks such a reunion could pose, particularly because he knows how complicated their breakup had been. With a calm but firm tone, Mark tries to express his feelings. "Sarah, it's not that I want to control your decisions," he says carefully, "but I feel uneasy about this idea. You two ended things in a complicated way, and I have concerns about him. Why do you want to see him?" Sarah almost dismissively responds, "It's just coffee, Mark. He's passing through and I thought it wouldn't hurt. But if it bothers you, I'll skip it." Her easy agreement leaves Mark conflicted. He had expected more resistance, perhaps an attempt to justify the meeting, but on the other hand, he feels momentarily relieved. She seems to understand and, in a casual tone, returns to preparing dinner, as if the conversation is already forgotten. This simple response should reassure him, but instead, it does not. Something inside him remains unsettled, like an ominous premonition that this night is only the beginning of something troubling. He watches Sarah, now absorbed in her cooking, and unsuccessfully tries to push away the feeling that something much bigger is coming. In the days following the conversation, Mark tries to continue with his usual routine. He convinces himself that Sarah agreed not to meet James and that the matter is resolved. Yet, deep inside, a nagging feeling lingers, a sense of unease that won't let him rest. He notices that, although she accepted not seeing her ex, Sarah begins to act differently. Her behavior changes in ways that don't match the woman he thought he knew so well. First, it's her schedule. She used to always text when she finished work to let him know when she'd be home. It had become such a natural habit that Mark hardly noticed until it stopped. Now, there are days when she only sends brief messages saying she'll be working late, or that there's an emergency at the hospital. He tries to dismiss it, telling himself that maybe she's facing more pressure at work, but the idea that there's more to these changes lingers. One evening, Mark sees her come home later than usual. He's sitting on the couch, waiting for her, and as he hears the door open, he looks up with quiet anticipation. Sarah enters with a tired smile, placing her bag on the table, but she seems uneasy. Mark watches her closely, analyzing her movements and expressions, trying to understand his own discomfort. He's always believed he knew Sarah better than anyone, but tonight she feels a little distant, and he senses an invisible weight in the air that's impossible to ignore. She mumbles something about being tired from the day and heads straight for the shower, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He tries to push aside his insecurities, but his mind keeps returning to the thought of James. Could the meeting she promised not to have actually be happening? His mind starts to analyze every detail, every small shift in Sarah's behavior. Why would she change her messaging routine? Why the late nights? More importantly, why does it feel like she's not being entirely honest with him? The next night, another incident adds to his suspicions. Sarah says she'll be at the hospital covering a colleague's shift. Mark, who has always trusted her without question, feels his heart tighten when he hears the excuse. He's not sure if it's paranoia or intuition, but something feels wrong. He tries to act normally, but each new excuse only deepens his doubts. Even her voice sounds different, as though she's concealing something. Days later, Mark has an early meeting that allows him to come home earlier than expected. He decides not to tell Sarah, planning to surprise her with dinner. But when he arrives, he finds the house empty and quiet. None of the lights are on, and there's no sign that Sarah has been there recently. He sends a casual message asking about her day, but there's no immediate response, which only feels more unusual. Sitting in the dark living room, he feels a chill run down his spine. Sarah, the woman he trusted completely, is turning into a mystery before his eyes. With each passing day, the uncertainty grows, becoming a heavy presence that won't let him rest. Mark's usual rationality begins to fade, replaced by a protective instinct, a growing need to act before something even worse happens. He finds himself obsessing over how he can uncover the truth if there is indeed something hidden. This doubt consumes him, robbing him of the peace that once characterized his quiet life. The thought that Sarah might be seeing James, despite her promise, gnaws at every bit of his confidence, until he feels like a stranger in his own home. Mark decides to confront his suspicions in a different way. Instead of direct confrontation, he chooses to observe and wait, giving Sarah the chance to prove if she's truly being honest. That day, he leaves work early and drives straight to the hospital where she works. He parks his car in a discreet spot, where he can see the entrance without being noticed. He checks his watch repeatedly, counting the minutes. She had said it would be a busy night, and that she'd be staying late to cover a colleague's shift. However, something in the way she had said it made him uneasy. Goodbye. That morning left Mark with an unsettling sensation, a strong feeling that something was off. He takes a deep breath, feeling the tension build with each passing moment. He knows that if Sarah is telling the truth, she won't leave the hospital anytime soon. But if she's lying, she'll leave right after her shift ends, and then he'll finally have the answer. Time moves slowly, and Mark is filled with anxiety. He recalls all the small signs, the changes in Sarah's behavior, the excuses for being late, and doubt pounds in his mind. He tries to convince himself that he's just being paranoid, that maybe she's simply tired from work, but he refuses to leave without knowing the truth. When the clock marks the end of Sarah's shift, Mark holds his breath and watches the hospital entrance closely. To his surprise and dismay, he sees her walk out. Sarah steps through the door, dressed casually, with a calm expression, as though it's just another normal day. She looks around briefly, making sure no one is watching, then heads quickly to her car. Mark feels his heart drop as all his suspicions seem to be confirmed, but he needs to see where this leads. He starts his car and follows her from a distance, making sure to stay far enough away so she doesn't notice. She drives without urgency, as though heading to a planned meeting, and Mark feels a painful tightness in his chest. A few minutes later, she parks outside a quiet restaurant and quickly exits the car. Mark pulls over at a safe distance, watching her as she checks her watch with a look of anticipation. Then he sees James approach. It's him, Sarah's ex-boyfriend, the man she claimed she wouldn't meet. They exchange a brief but familiar hug before entering the restaurant together. Mark watches in silence, feeling a mix of anger and disappointment. It's clear this isn't just a casual get-together. The comfort between them is unmistakable, and all his worst fears begin to unfold before his eyes. Still, he stays in his car, holding back and waiting to see just how far this lie will go. After some time, Sarah and James emerge from the restaurant, now even closer. Sarah laughs at something he says, and they both climb into James's car. Mark's pain becomes almost unbearable, but he remains resolute, following them in silence, determined to uncover the full truth. Each mile feels like another piece of his life is being torn apart. Finally, the car stops outside a motel, and Sarah and James get out, walking in without hesitation. Mark watches, stunned, as his wife crosses the threshold of a motel with another man. The blow is devastating. All the trust he had placed in her now seems like a fragile illusion, shattered by the weight of betrayal. Mark feels an indescribable heaviness as he watches her enter the motel. He stays there, staring at the door, knowing that with it, all the trust and security he once felt in his marriage is gone. His world feels as though it's collapsing, but he forces himself to remain calm. He needs more than just the sight of her walking through that door. He needs proof. His instincts guide him to an unexpected plan. He pulls out his phone, composing a message with forced calmness. She can't know he's there, and he wants her to reveal herself. Quickly, he types a cold, almost businesslike message. "Sarah, I need to talk to you urgently. I'm in front of the hospital." He waits, the silence stretching on, each second feeling like an eternity. He wonders if she'll respond, but then his phone vibrates. It's her. "I can't write right now, Mark. I'm with patients. It'll be a while." Her blatant lie feels like a knife to his heart. He takes a deep breath, feeling the pain mixing with cold, calculated anger. Her voice echoes in his mind, insisting she's with patients, and he has to fight the urge to scream at her, to confront her right then. Instead, he keeps his composure and replies, "All right, I'll wait at the entrance until you're done." He finishes the message, and then watches the motel entrance with a patience he didn't know he had. He knows the message has planted a seed of panic in her, and he's willing to wait as long as it takes to see how this plays out. Mark sits there motionless, his eyes fixed on the entrance. Within minutes, the plan unfolds. The motel door opens, and Sarah hurries out with James. Her face is marked with tension, her eyes restless, as though she's searching for something, or someone. It's as though she knows her actions are wrong but is trying to justify them anyway. When he sees her outside the motel, Mark feels a mix of disgust, and oddly enough, relief. At last, the truth is exposed, and he no longer has to carry the weight of doubt. She looks around, clearly on edge, until their eyes meet. In that instant, she freezes upon seeing him standing across the street, silently watching her. Mark keeps his gaze steady, offering no reaction, as if all his emotions are hidden behind a cold mask of indifference. He doesn't need to say anything. Sarah understands everything in that split second. Her expression shifts from surprise to something close to despair, and she starts walking toward him, her eyes pleading for a chance to explain. But Mark doesn't give her a chance. Without uttering a single word, he turns and walks away, leaving her standing motionless between the motel and the consequences of her actions. Mark gets into his car, closing the door firmly, and drives away without looking back. The image of Sarah frozen on the sidewalk is seared into his memory like an indelible mark. He drives through the city streets aimlessly, his only goal to distance himself from the scene, from the betrayal. Each mile brings a flood of memories, moments they shared together, now shattered, as though they meant nothing. He feels a mix of anger, sadness, and above all, an emptiness that seems to consume his entire soul. The night drags on, and he can't bring himself to return home just yet. The place that once felt safe now feels like a foreign space, tainted by the memory of betrayal. He stops at a hotel, a modest place far from his neighborhood, and decides that's where he'll spend the night. After checking in, he enters the room and sits on the bed, staring at the blank walls, unsure of what to do next. Mark picks up his phone and notices several missed calls and messages from Sarah, all pleading with him to hear her out and let her explain. He doesn't respond to any of them. The feeling of betrayal, seeing the woman he loved so easily cast aside, overwhelms him. He reads her messages, each filled with empty apologies and justifications. She begs for another chance, admitting her mistake. But to him, it all feels like a hastily constructed lie, an attempt to cover something that is already crystal clear. That night, he struggles to sleep, as his mind replays every moment of their relationship, analyzing all the times he believed her love was sincere. He wonders how many other lies she may have hidden, how many other nights she could have spent with James or anyone else. The doubt gnaws at him, turning every happy memory into a painful, unanswered question. The next morning, Mark makes up his mind. He can't delay this any longer. He returns home, determined to end this chapter once and for all. When he enters, everything appears as he left it, but the atmosphere now feels strange, almost foreign. He realizes how the walls, once full of meaning, now seem empty, stripped of the life they had shared. He begins packing his things into a suitcase with the same cold resolve he had when confronting her the night before. Photos, clothes, items that once told their story, now just reminders of a lie. Mark leaves behind nothing that could bring back memories of the betrayal. Each piece of clothing folded is like a part of the past he chooses to remove from his life, without a second thought. Sarah arrives home during this process, anxiety written on her face, her gaze desperate. She tries to approach him, attempting to explain, but he doesn't engage. With every sentence she starts, he remains silent, refusing to look at her directly, as though she's a stranger in his home. When he finishes packing, Mark looks up at her, his eyes cold, as if she's merely an acquaintance, someone he's seen briefly. He opens the door and, without a word, crosses the threshold of the house that now belongs to her and the emptiness she has created. He leaves, head held high, knowing there's nothing left to say. He leaves behind not just a house but also a love that turned out to be an illusion. Mark heads to the hotel, bags in hand, leaving behind the home he once built with Sarah and everything he thought was real. His mind is filled with conflicting emotions, but one thought begins to form clearly, a decision fueled by a need for justice, an overwhelming urge to reveal the last truth. While in the hotel room, he recalls every detail of that night. Sarah's cold lies, the way she interacted with James as if Mark were irrelevant. Something inside him pushes him to seek justice, not to cause harm, but to reveal the truth, as though doing so could somehow restore balance. He opens his phone, goes through his photos, and selects the image of Sarah and James entering the motel together. Undeniable proof of the betrayal. With calm precision, he opens social media and starts searching for information about James. It doesn't take long before he finds the profile of Megan, James's wife. She seems kind, with a warm smile, in the photos she shares with James. Family moments, trips, a life that to any outsider appears full of happiness and trust. Mark feels a heaviness in his chest, realizing how similar it is to the life he thought he had until just days ago. Even so, he knows it's the right thing to do. Megan deserves to know the truth, just as he had to face it. He writes a brief, straightforward message, attaching the photo from that painful night. Each word is carefully chosen, understanding the gravity of what he's doing. He imagines himself in her shoes, receiving such devastating news, and feels a mixture of sadness and relief, as if he's finally closing the last page of a bitter chapter. Minutes after sending the message, Mark steps away from his phone, feeling a strange sense of peace. He doesn't expect a reply, nor does he want to prolong the situation. For him, it's enough that the truth has been revealed, and that Megan now has the opportunity to make her own decisions. It's a burden he carries with some bitterness, but with the certainty that he did the right thing. The following day, Mark wakes up to the sound of notifications on his phone. Among the many messages from Sarah, one is from Megan. He hesitates briefly but eventually opens it. Megan thanks him for his honesty, saying that although the news was devastating, she's grateful to finally know the truth. In her words, Mark senses pain, but also a surprising strength. Megan mentions that she has already made her decision and won't give James the opportunity to lie again. As he reads those words, Mark feels that his choice has provided closure, not just for him, but also for someone else who, like him, was deceived by someone they trusted. After all the turmoil, Mark realizes it's time for a fresh start. He spends the next few days alone in the hotel, sorting through the remnants of his life, determined to turn the page. One of the most important decisions he makes is to move to a new city. Since he was young, he dreamed of living by the sea, in a quiet town where the sound of the waves could soothe his soul and where the open horizon promised new beginnings. With that renewed hope, he finds the courage to make it a reality. Without hesitation, he begins researching coastal cities, places where life feels simpler and routines follow the rhythm of nature. The idea of walking barefoot on the sand, feeling the sea breeze on his face, offers him a glimpse of the peace he so desperately needs. In just a few days, he organizes everything, wraps up his remaining commitments, and signs the final divorce papers. An official end to a chapter marked by pain and disillusionment. Arriving in the new city is more liberating than Mark had imagined. He chooses a small, cozy apartment with a broad view of the sea. Each morning feels like a rebirth, an opportunity to rewrite his story, far from the memories of the past. Mark realizes that, for the first time in a long time, He's living for himself, rediscovering interests and dreams he had neglected in the rush of marriage and a hectic routine. Gradually, he establishes a new rhythm. Morning walks along the shore, runs on the boardwalk, and coffee at small local spots where he feels a sense of community. He meets new people, forms casual friendships, and discovers a peace he's never experienced before. The emptiness that once consumed him begins to be replaced by a serenity he thought was unreachable. Over time, the memories of Sarah and the betrayal become less painful, like scars that, though still present, no longer hurt as they once did. He learns to live with them, seeing them as part of a life that no longer belongs to him. The ocean, with its vastness, seems to absorb the last traces of his sorrow, and he begins to view the future with a lightness that seemed impossible. Mark fully embraces this new life, exploring every corner of the city, every opportunity that freedom offers. Gradually, he starts to feel whole again, rediscovering who he truly is, free from the weight of past disappointments. Days pass, and Mark finds balance in his new routine. He becomes involved in the local community, meeting people who lead simple yet meaningful lives, and gradually rediscovers the beauty in the little things. Life by the sea brings him a clarity he hadn't felt in years. Over time, he feels stronger, more at peace, as if the salt of the sea has washed away every trace of the pain left behind. On a quiet afternoon, as he sits at an outdoor cafe, watching the ebb and flow of the waves, Mark receives an unexpected message from an old friend, someone still in contact with Sarah. Reluctantly, he opens the message, and reading it, feels a mix of surprise and a strange indifference. Sarah, the woman he once loved deeply, has fallen into depression since the divorce. She seems to have sunk into regret and sadness, spending entire days isolated and silent. Mark sits there, looking at the phone, absorbing the words without the pain he thought he might feel. The news, which would have once shaken him, now feels like a distant echo. He realizes that it no longer affects him as it once might have, as if it's the story of someone else, a chapter that has been closed and locked away in the past. He reflects for a few moments, his eyes lost on the blue horizon. He wonders if he should feel a stronger response, a desire to help or extend a hand to the person who was once his partner. But he doesn't. Mark understands that this peace, this new life he's created with so much effort, can no longer be disturbed by the past. He did everything he could. He was true to himself. And now he's exactly where he needs to be. Mark stands, walking toward the beach, his feet sinking into the warm sand. The breeze touches his face, and he closes his eyes, letting the sea fully embrace him.